Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Joel Hunter, host of Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth. Now, on today's program, we've got two good friends of mine and two colleagues as we talk about the challenges of this community. Today, I want to talk about government and how it helps or not. And so I first of all, let me introduce to you Dick Batchelor, who's to my immediate left. I recently told my son if there were a Mount Rushmore of Orlando, this guy's face would be on it, complete with the glasses. He has served in the state legislature for years, but has been Central Florida Floridian of the Year, is a consultant both in business and in politics, and you will hear his commentary often, especially during election seasons. And then my other good friend, Andrew Thomas. Andrew is, by the way, the chairman of the Homeless Services Network in our region, but he works for the city of Sanford as the Community Relations Neighborhood Engagement Person for the city of Sanford. Now watch this. Before he got here, though, I want to read this title so that I get it right. Before he got here, he was the executive director of the Center for Dispute Settlement in New York.
Oh my gosh!
Now they've got some disputes in New York.
It worked overtime, I bet.
And this guy was the peacemaker. As a matter of fact, they have an Andrew Thomas Peace Builder Award up there, and I've watched him in action, and he is a genius when it comes to mediation. And so let me start out with just a general question. Andrew, let me go to you first, because you work for the city of Sanford. Your business is community relations.
Yes.
What is the role of government in settling community disputes or trying to somehow mediate community disputes? Is that what you do, or do you, when the city has a project, do you go to the community and try to figure out how to gauge their feelings on it?
Okay, is there a third option, Doctor? Those first two, yes.
Or you can tell us what you actually do.
Both of the above. At times, it's difficult to play the role of mediator, but you can do process design, because very often the disputes, the city and local government is somewhere as one of the parties to it. So very often it is working, one is acknowledging, I hear you, their concerns, and let's talk about, so what's our next step? How do we begin to move forward in addressing it? From both sides with the community, in terms of, you have to pull together, kind of organize what it is that you're asking for, what it is, or how do you feel you have been wrong, and what would it take to make you whole again? And from government standpoint, that very often the issues that you're dealing with may not have happened on your watch, that there's an opportunity for you to make amends on your watch. Yeah. So if you don't take it personal, but you can listen and you can validate and say, how do we work on this together? Yeah. So your objective, I see, in my role is turning those face-to-face confrontation to side-by-side collaboration and moving forward.
Ooh. Yeah, write that down.
I did. I'm going to use that. That was great.
All right, I'm going to come back to you with another impossible question in just a minute, and you can be thinking about this. As people are listening, if they have a local issue, where do they go with that issue? Okay, so be thinking about that. But Dick, I want to ask you more of a I'm about to give up on national politics. You know, I mean, it's just like, okay, I'm signing off because it's all about partisan politics. Yeah. It's all about adversarial name calling, and you know, at least in my own area, maybe I can make a difference.
Right.
What do you say to somebody who is just so fed up that it's just they're ready to give up?
Well, I think, you know, first of all, there's, I think Jefferson said that basically the safest repository for a democracy is the hand of a free and informed public. So I see the government really as a platform to help facilitate conversation as regards public policy. But you have to stay involved because that also the saying is power abhors a vacuum. If you're not at the table, someone else will be, and they might not have your position or share your thoughts and your philosophy. So you have to keep persisting. It's extraordinarily frustrating for people now. I think the whole mindset about politics, that it's so fragmented, as you have alluded to, and you really do want to kind of leave because the fact is the adversarial nature of politics is such now, you really don't want to be in the line of fire, so to speak. But you really have to take a deep breath, kind of refresh, retool, re-energize, but you've got to go back into the arena because if you're not there asserting your position, that void somebody will fill for you.
Yeah. Andrew, could I ask you, let me delay my question to you just for a moment.
Sure.
Well, no, let me do it. Because I know you've been, and they're going to be going, wait, he's going to forget about that. No. If you have a local issue, where would a citizen go with a complaint or an issue? Who would they address? How would they address that?
Well, Dr. Donner, it depends on the nature of your complaint or the issue. Being from upstate New York, you have a lot of social service, human services, and so forth, that you have other options. My experience being here, that very often they're going to come to City Hall. That's going to be a phone call to the mayor, a phone call to the city manager, in terms of whatever that situation. And then it's sorting through and saying, so where does this really fit, and who should be at the table trying to resolve it? It's it's housing. We have issues with affordable housing. People can't find housing. Okay, if they can't find housing, you could go to the housing authority, but you find out that there's a waiting list and you can't get on the waiting list. Or you do your own shopping around and you go and you contact the complexes and apartments and you realize you can't afford what they have. So your next call then is, chances are, to the mayor's office. I can't find housing. And you have the individual situation, but it's a much bigger problem. So that leads into, in terms of, is it going out? So how do you deal with it from the policy standpoint? And if you're not at the table advocating it, then you're not going to affect the change. So.
And you can leverage your influence as an individual. A lot of people's frustration might be, well, who am I? But again, you have to stay in the arena. But you can leverage your position and your ability to communicate that by joining forces. For instance, not-for-profit groups, advocacy groups. Housing is one, you might take that. Child abuse prevention and treatment, you might join that group. You might get on the board of Harbor House to advocate on domestic violence. So there are these groups that you can join, and that way when you go to see your elected official, for instance, it's just not you. It's you and an organization. And what I really stress with people, if you have an issue, if you have a passion about it, put a face on that passion. What is the issue? Often I would take young people to Tallahassee to lobby their legislators because they could communicate something that I cannot communicate, and that is, they're in the trenches. They're at risk. They are the ones who need the help. So there's a way to leverage your influence in the political process and the government process.
Absolutely.
That's a really good. It's a really good. Dick and I were in Tallahassee together not long ago when the Parkland kids showed up, and that was a significant
force, right?
A significant attention turner.
Can I make a point on that, Joel?
Sure.
And I'm glad you brought up the Parkland kids in Tallahassee. Keep in mind, Parkland took place while the legislature was in session. So it's like maybe the unfortunate storm, but then the kids went to Tallahassee to advocate. Those legislators had really no choice. They had to do something because you had the parents there of those who had lost loved ones, children. You had the children there advocating on behalf of those who had been killed. And they were meeting with the governor and the legislative leadership in the House and Senate, and then the legislature did something which I would never predict it. They actually passed legislation, dealing with guns in the state of Florida, and a very conservative legislature. But I make that point that there's children, and their timing is important. But they not only went up there individually, but they leveraged their influence and got something done.
Did make a difference.
Did make a difference.
And if I may follow up on that one too, and agreeing because I think there's layers, so that you need the policy changes and so forth. You've got the policy that supports it. It very often comes back to your local government in terms of that sets a foundation for, where do you go above and beyond that in dealing with your locals, in terms of like with continuing with the situation with the students in gun control, with the police departments. So you can say that yes, as the sheriff's department and local police have increased the number of the school resource officers that they have. But that's great, but if the funding is not there to do that, I mean, the greatest intentions, but you don't have the ability to follow through. And very often we get the legislation but no appropriations to support it, so that it has to go, hand in hand. And I agree with you, there's no better ones that tell a story than those that are directly impacted by it. Because those stories are, heartfelt and heart-wrenching. They lived it. So very often you make decisions and policy on something that you visit, but other people live. So you yield to that life story and take that into consideration.
And from your experience, that really does make a difference when people show up and have an issue. Do you think government is really receptive to people's opinions and their frustrations and so on and so forth?
I think they are, and I think that is something that over time that we have become more in tune to, because many of the situations that we're dealing with and the problems that we're working on, they didn't occur overnight. Those have been there, they've festered for some time. And it's got to the tipping point. And you've hit the tipping point, and now it's an opportunity to say, so what are you going to do? And very often say, you're bringing people in because you can't fix what you don't know what's wrong and assessing it. And then there has to be the acknowledgement and a willingness to say that, there's a problem. If we take the homeless, and I've been with the city of Sanford for 8 years, when I first got here in this community, it's like, we don't have a homeless problem. In Seminole County, we don't admit to it. We don't have a homeless problem. But somebody else comes out and look at it and say, maybe you do. But then you realize and say, well, maybe we do, but let's do something about it. And maybe you're not the ones that first is educate yourself. And educate yourself is to hear from those that I say that lives that. They're in the trenches. They're doing it every day. And then you begin to think about, because very often those that make the policy and the decision says, bingo, here's a solution. So you got the quick fix. And the quick fix don't last. So you got to involve inclusion, include all of them, and constantly raising that question you pointed out, who's missing from this table?
And I think people, I think people need to understand too that, again, that the government belongs to them. And the government I see is a nomenclature for public dialogue to force policy changes, right? It should not be an animal into and of itself. I think Jefferson also said what the government can do for you, it can do to you. So you have to obviously restrict the ability of government to intrude in your lives. But if you go back and say it is a platform, a nomenclature for me to redress my grievances of government, looking at it that way, and don't get tangled up in the minutia of that process, but be an advocate and be a very vocal advocate.
We've all been working on the problem of homelessness together, and we've been working hard. I think people have read that we are tied for second in the nation from the bottom, as to having the biggest problem of affordable housing. Las Vegas is first. We're tied with Los Angeles as the major city with the least affordable housing. I think it's like 18 units per 100 families that are searching. But let me kind of mention this frustration, because we've got the same frustration with the Sadowski funds.
We do.
And there's already money set aside in state government for specifically for affordable housing, and then it gets rated. Every year it gets rated. And this year's no exception.
Absolutely.
Huge rate on these funds. And so when the paper says, when an editorial comes out in the paper says, let's remember this in November.
Right.
Is that realistic? I mean, are people going to say, I'm going to vote in November against this person because they voted to raid the Sadowski funds? I mean, I guess what I'm asking here is, how many issues should you have in mind when you vote or when you complain?
I think on the affordable housing, I don't think it will be a big campaign issue, unfortunately, because as you pointed out, they have taken, since the creation of the Sadowski funds, which was for affordable housing, the legislature has taken $2 billion out of that fund and used it for other reasons. You know how many housing units $2 billion would provide? The second point I want to make, and when you talk about affordable housing, we're talking about people who are just finishing college and they're teachers or firefighters. We're not, you've got the Housing Authority, which I sit on, Orlando Housing Authority, and we do have subsidized housing for people who are poorer. But keep in mind, affordable housing is really not, it's really for a larger part of the population. But I wish it could be a real key issue because everybody said it was a priority, but then they took the money.
Yeah.
So that frustrates people who are housing advocates, of course.
Well, let me, Andrew, let me ask you this. We're in Seminole County, because I live in Seminole County as well. We don't have the same challenge as Orange or Osceola. But yet we do have a challenge. What part does the city play as differentiated from the county when it comes to issues that deal with everyday living, including housing? Is there a difference there? Is there some specific role like the city of Sanford would play, or the city of Longwood, or the city of Oviedo, as differentiated from the county commissioners?
Yes. In terms of just housing, is that if you look at area median income and the value and price of housing, if you look at the other cities within Seminole County, if you take the average median income, $58,000, and you say in the city of Sanford, that's about $45,000. So you base the price of your housing on your average median income so that you can afford houses in certain communities. But because of the average median income, therefore the price of property and houses in the city of Sanford is going to be lower. And because they're lower, then it obviously generates less ad valorem taxes in order to support the city. So when we look at that in terms of a kind of what we can do and what we have to do in addressing the social service, human services problems, because of the pure dynamics of it, those with less income, those working poor, chances are the places they can afford to live, more than likely it's going to be in the city of Sanford or in the other unincorporated communities within Seminole County. So then we have to look at it different in terms of how do we support them. It's a challenge when you lose all of your housing, as you know we did with the Sanford Housing Authority. So what do you do, with those individuals in another situation? Didn't happen overnight, but over a period of time, and you say, well, somebody fell asleep on your watch. At a number of levels that we arrived at that point. But in terms of the response, is with the city partnering with the Housing Authority and saying, let's deal with this. We applied for HUD assistance. We were fortunate. We were one of 8 out of probably 170 applicants to get a Choice Neighborhoods grant. And that amounted to just under $1 million to do a plan for one of our more distressed areas in the city. That was a 2-year planning process that we've worked on. And we've looked at all of the significant demographics within that particular community, being Goldsboro. We've looked at public safety, we've looked at education, we've looked at the housing aspect of it, we've looked at unemployment, we've looked at transportation, we've looked at connectivity. Those are all of the things that it takes to make a community and make it desirable.
That's a really good point. Let's talk about that just for a minute, because people just want their problem solved, and in a day when everything is instant, communications instant, instant oatmeal, everything's instant.
Right.
But what Andrew brings up is these are tremendously complex
Very much so.
solutions that involve a lot of parties, so that you do the least intended harm, you know, that you don't have unintended consequences to your solutions. Dick, when we are dealing with an issue, we'll stay with homelessness just for a second. When we're dealing with any large issue in a community, whether it be homelessness or crime or, you know, drugs or trafficking or, you know, any of these issues that disproportionately deal with a certain portion of our population that aren't advantaged.
Right.
What are the kind of the, in the meantime I can get relief from
Right.
steps that people can take while they figure out the big picture? Do we have, or is there a way to find some organizations within the community that can specifically address the issue that I'm dealing with, so that you know, even if the government's trying to do the right thing, they're not going to do it quick enough to solve my problem?
Right.
How would people go about finding that kind of help?
Well, first of all, United Way, as you well know, has what they call a 211 system, where basically you can dial 211 and they can tell you, you tell them your issue, what your needs are. They try to direct you to a resource that can provide that, where you're homeless, you need food, you need clothing, you're a victim of human trafficking, whatever. So the 211 system, I think, is a very, very good approach to things. But again, go back to find those advocacy groups. If you know, there is Florida Abolitionists, as you know, which is a group that deals with anti-human trafficking.
How do you find them? How do you find the advocacy group?
A 211 is a very good way to start.
Okay.
Just a very good way to start there.
Okay.
But can I make a point about housing real
Absolutely.
fast? Because it's so important, because you know, there's what we call the Alice Report, which is a statewide study on poverty. And it basically says that a very large percentage of people in Florida are one car repair away from poverty. They don't have the money, and keeping the average income for a family of four just to survive is $50,000. Keep in mind that the small two-bed apartment in the communities, it's available. It's not affordable housing, but it's a housing that's available. It's $1,200. So if you take child care, housing, groceries, all those expenses,
$1,200 a month.
It's gone. So there are so many people in Florida. 24% of the children in Orange County are below the poverty level.
Wow.
So it's housing and all these other attendant issues, but it really is more about economic development, job training, job placement, and really wages. Wages have got to be increased. You cannot survive, and people are working 2 and 3 part-time jobs just to survive this community. So it's a big, complex problem, and you do have to get all the people to come, all the parties that can facilitate change to come to the table. This resolution, it might not be a conflict resolution, but it's something we need to resolve a problem. And again, that begs the question: just how do I, as a citizen of Washington today, and say I've got a very strong passion about this issue? How can I be involved? And government really does solicit people like that to be involved, to give a really a nice, informed perspective, to always find the right point of access so you can be involved in that public policy decision.
Andrew, just a few minutes left here, but let's talk about groups that are non-governmental groups and their importance. We realize that if we stay involved, government will be part of the solution, but it can't be the whole solution. If there's a community-wide problem, then the community should be responsible for it. How much of a part do you think that community groups like Rotary Club, Kiwanis, you know, all of these very good community groups, how much of a part do you think they can play in alleviating some of these problems?
Well, I think there's a huge role for our fraternity organizations, civic organizations to play, but I'm not going to leave out the community itself in terms of going back to the community organizing and building capacity within the community. If we can build around, it can go in and do for that it goes back to the old adage, you're giving them a fish. If you don't take some time throughout giving them, teaching them, which is very critical, so that there's a lot of time, and my job with the city is doing that capacity building, bringing the parties to the table. Yes, you can come in and do it for them, and I realize it probably would be easier for you to do that, but I'm going to ask you to take the additional step, work with them to build that capacity, teach them, show them how they can sustain their community. Let them become invested in it. They'll care more about it. And that's going to make a huge difference in the community. You know, like in the community we're working in now, because you lack in those distressed areas any type of organization. Everyone comes in and provides services for them, and you're gone, and you leave them where they are. One of our critical points in that is we have to identify a lead agency, provide the necessary resources and training to make them a viable, sustainable organization within that community to be a driving force. And I share with them in terms of your equal partners with the city, your equal partners with government, but you have to advocate your needs.
We have, we're going to be out of time. I hate this because we just got started. But let me sum up for you. We do have a great form of government if we stay involved and if we persevere. Do not grow weary in well-doing, as Scripture says. But we also have to realize, just according to this last part of this conversation, is that we, the community, are responsible. When the Scripture says, love your neighbor as you love yourself, that's not an emotion, that's an action. And so each one of us need to stay tuned to how we can help within any group or individually possibly to make our communities a better place. Because as it says in Jeremiah 29, in its well-being will be your well-being. We're out of time, but I want to thank all of you, and Dick and Andrew, you're awesome. You're rock stars in this community, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Remember, these discussions are just that, discussions among us. We'd love to see you continue the discussions at home and go one step farther. Get involved. Because when power talks, you are empowered through the voice of truth. See you next time.